Greetings, students. Today we're talking about organizing and outlining your speech, and this corresponds to Chapter 8 in your text. Today I want to talk about three main things. First, strategies for organizing your main points. Secondly, transitioning and signposting between those main points. And thirdly, how to organize and outline your speech in general, with particular reference to the outline assignments that you'll be turning in this class. Let's get started with some organizational strategies for your main points. Let's assume that you've got your topic, you've narrowed down your topic, you've done your brainstorming, you've got your main points picked out. Now the question is, which main point do you put first? Which one comes second? Which one comes third? What makes the most sense? Well, the book gives us some strategies for that, and which one you pick will depend upon the type of speech you're giving and the one that's appropriate to the topic. The book talks about several. I'd like to focus in on three. I want to talk about the chronological organizational style, the spatial organizational style, and the topical. Chronological talks about something's position in time. So if the thing that you're talking about in the speech has to do with sequences of steps, and those steps are time sensitive, you would want to use the chronological speaking strategy, or the chronological speaking order. For example, in your demonstration speech, a lot of you are going to be walking us through steps in a process, and the order in which one does those steps is important for the success of the overall demonstration. You can't mix the ingredients of a cake together after you bake them. You have to bake them first. So the order is important, and if you are dividing your speech up according to steps, then you're using the chronological style. But not all speeches are like that. You might be, say, a realtor talking to a potential buyer about a particular house. In that case, you can talk about the rooms in any order you want. You can walk through that house in any order. It doesn't matter which rooms you enter first. So in that case, you're going to use the spatial organizational strategy, because you're going to be dividing that speech up into where things are in space, or particular areas of space. So you would go into the kitchen, talk about the appliances in that kitchen, and when you're done, maybe go into the living room and talk about the features of the living room. So that would be the spatial organizational strategy. In that case, the rooms in the house would be the main points, and the appliances or the features of those given rooms would be the subpoints within any given main point. Finally, there's the topical organizational strategy, and this one is the widest open because it allows you as the speaker to use your discretion to chunk up the large topic into smaller topics at your discretion in whatever way you think best. So let me go over just a couple of examples really briefly on these. Let's say you want to give a speech on baseball, and let's say you want to use the chronological organizational strategy to talk about baseball. So we're talking about steps in a process there. You might talk about how a typical game unfolds, if you think your audience doesn't already know that. You want to talk about maybe one inning following the next. What is an inning? One team bats, the other team's in the field, and then they switch. You would talk about when they switch. Or you could widen out your scope just a little bit and talk about the chronological structure of a season, of a particular season. Or you could talk about the road leading up to the World Series and when these games are played, and what winning one or losing one means for a given team. And this would all be chronological because you're talking about steps in a process toward winning the World Series in that case, or toward winning a game if you want to focus on the anatomy of a particular game. Either way, that would be an example of chronological. Now, you could organize a speech on baseball using the spatial style as well. Tons of ways you could do that. One way I could think of is, so we're talking about space, where things are in space. Maybe you want to describe the game of baseball by talking about the field. You want to talk about first base, second base, third base, home plate, why they're called those things, where they are, the distances between them, outfield, left, right, and center. Maybe the dugout. If you want, you can talk about the stadiums, where the stadiums are, the concession stands, and so on. And so here you see what we're talking about places and locations, but we're still talking about the game of baseball. We're just taking a different approach because we're using a different organizational strategy. Finally, you want to talk about baseball using the topical organizational strategy. You could do a number of things once again. Maybe you are going to talk about the equipment used in the game of baseball. You want to talk about the balls, how they're made, the sizes, diameters, the bats, the materials for making bats. What are the bases made out of? How do you maintain a field? What goes into the groundkeeping? And so on. You could divide up according to whatever topic interests you. If you want to talk about the history of baseball, which a lot of times people try to talk about history, that's actually less topical and more chronological, because at that point we're back talking about events that take place in a particular time. Okay, so those are some of the strategies you can use to organize your main points. What I'm going to be looking for is, as I'm watching speeches, I'm going to be asking myself, is there some kind of a method to the madness here? Did you use some kind of a strategy to decide which point comes first, and did that first point lead naturally into the second point, into the third point? Was there an organizational strategy involved in the speech? Now, the points blending smoothly together leads us to the second thing I wanted to talk about really quickly, which was transitions. When you are going from one point to the next, it's necessary that you take a moment to kind of psychically pause so that the audience can catch up before you launch into that next point. You might notice that I just tried to do that same thing myself, where I signaled to you that I was done talking about organizational strategies, and now I'm talking about the next item on this lecture, which is transitions. And that's all I ask of you as well. Usually it's just one sentence. In the outline that you type up, it's actually a sentence that's in parentheses between main point 1 and main point 2. It can be something really simple and utilitarian, like saying, now that we're done with that topic, that leads us naturally into this topic. That sentence would suffice for a very bare bones transition. You can get more ornate and flowery with them as well. A lot of times when you finish your main point number 1, that will raise questions naturally in the audience's mind, and you can draw attention to those. Now you may be wondering X, Y, and Z. Well, let's answer those questions now, and that gets you into your next point. The book also talks about signposts in general. To me, a signposting word is like just one word, like first, second, or third, next, however, any of those words that kind of signal to the audience where you are in the speech. These things are so important. I love signpost words. I encourage you to sprinkle them liberally on your speech all over the place, because the audience, they want to stay with you. They want to know where you are in the speech. Otherwise they get disoriented. So let us know where you are at all times in the speech. It also talks about summaries. It talks about previews, summaries and previews, internal previews particularly. Sometimes, let's say you finish point number 1, you're getting ready to go into point number 2, and point number 2 is complicated, big ball of wax. Before you just plow into that point, you might want to preview it with one sentence and just say, okay, here's what we've talked about, and here's where we're going, and here's kind of the couple of things that I'm going to be talking about in this next point, before you start getting into them in greater detail. Again, that just helps the audience. The whole point here is to be audience-centered so that they can stay with you. So with reference to transitions, you do need one transition between each main point. I think of them as the shock absorbers of the speech, or the brakes of a speech. If you're driving a car on a windy road and you try to take a turn without slowing down, you're going to plow right off the road. And in the same way, if you jump from one point to the next without signaling to the audience and slowing down a little bit, then you're going to lose the audience when you make that transition. Okay, finally, a couple words on outlining really briefly. I can't emphasize enough how important it is to follow the sample outline that I put on Blackboard. It has an APA-style cover sheet, which you'll see, imitated exactly. Then at the beginning of the outline, you have the central idea, the general purpose, the specific purpose, the central idea typed out. And then you get right into the speech with the introduction, the body, and the conclusion. The introduction and the conclusion are written out in paragraph form, but the body is in outline form. The outline form uses Roman numerals for main points, and then A's, B's, and C's, 1, 2s, and 3s, and so on for your subpoints, kind of fleshing out each point. You will find, if you're using Microsoft Word or a similar word processor, that this often comes very easily. If you make a Roman numeral 1 and start typing and then return, it's automatically going to generate Roman numeral 2 next, most of the time. And then if you don't want a Roman numeral 2, if you just tab over, then it's going to change into a capital A, and then B and C and on and whatever you need. Make sure that you follow the organization or the the outline form closely. That's one of the things I grade on. The reason you have to do outlines is because they help keep ideas organized. They're supposed to smaller ideas are supposed to nest within bigger ideas. So if you have Roman numeral 1 and then an A, B, and C underneath it, A, B, and C should relate directly to Roman numeral 1. Otherwise, why are they there? That's the whole point of an outline, is A, B, and C must relate directly to Roman numeral 1. If you have an A and then you have a 1, 2, and 3 under A before you get to B and C, that 1, 2, and 3 has to relate directly to A. So it's hierarchical, and it helps to keep your ideas organized. Alright, let's see. We have talked about strategies for organizing your main points. We've talked a little bit about transitions, and then I've talked about outlining, and I've mainly directed you to the sample outline so that you follow it really closely. You'll see that there are transitions in there in parentheses between the main points, and the outline form is correct on the sample that I gave you. So in fact, you can just go in there and kind of delete the things that are on it and replace it with your own stuff, or however you choose to get the job done. Alright, I hope that this has been an informative lecture for you, and I look forward to seeing you again next time. Thanks.